Chapter 18, Part 4, Elements of Change and Unique Spiritual Practices. Written and produced by Thomas Tyseal. Copyright Thomas Tyseal unless otherwise noted. The ancient idea of the 5 elements of change is arguably the most important concept in Chinese metaphysics, paralleled only by the concept of qi, to which it is linked. Like qi, these elements are considered pervasive spiritual qualities of nature and affect all things. Their metaphysical influence shows up in Chinese medicine, acupuncture, food and diet, philosophy, psychology, feng shui, fortune-telling, and martial arts. It's governed much of Chinese life for millennia, so it's worth getting to know them. Chinese and others have long considered that there's something special about the number 5, Wu. There are 5 tastes, sour, sweet, salty, bitter, and acrid, 5 visible planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Mars, and Venus, 5 primary colors in early Chinese thought, green, yellow, black, red, and white, and 5 senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. So considering that there may be 5 natural elements is not so far-fetched. Around 500 BCE, in the spring and autumn period of the Zhou dynasty, tradition says that Confucius assembled a bunch of older documents into one of the 5 classics of ancient China, the Book of Documents, the Shu Jing. The Book of Documents asserts that there are 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. The Book of Documents also identified characteristics of each element. It said wood bends and straightens, fire blazes and ascends, earth receives and gives crops, metal yields and changes, and water moistens and descends. Similarly, in the Zhouzhuan, the Chronicles of Zhou, another of the 5 classics, it asserts that heaven has produced the 5 elements which supply humankind's requirements, and the people use them all. Not one of them can be dispensed with. Thus, the notion that there are 5 elements is at least as old as Confucius, and likely much older. Of course, we need to add yin and yang when we talk about the 5 elements. In the 3rd century BCE, the philosopher Zhou Yan merged the concept of yin and yang with that of the 5 elements, transforming these elements into a philosophy of how all change happens in both the natural and human world. Thus, Wu Qing, the 5 elements, is also often translated as 5 movements, phases, processes, or action. There's a logic to how yang and yin are fit to the elements. If yang is active energy, heat, and expansive upward movement, fire is the most yang, with little or no yin, and wood, with its growth upward, has more yang than yin. If yin is passive, receptive, dark, quiet, and cool, then water has the most yin and only a little yang, and metal, being cool and having little movement, has more yin than yang. Earth, being the mother of all, is balanced in yin and yang. In addition to yin and yang, we must also add the concept of qi, the different forms of energy, to our notion of the 5 elements of change. As you've seen, the concept of qi likely arose in the Shang dynasty, but written descriptions only appear from the Zhou dynasty, which ended in 221 BCE. Qi is, of course, the all-encompassing, nurturing, unifying force or energy that permeates all reality, animating and driving all things. As we've seen, in a Chinese evolutionary sense, heavenly qi came first, then earthly qi, then human qi. The parallel to chi among Hindus is prana, breath, among Greeks, pneuma, and among Christians, the Holy Spirit. The diagram here shows the influence of the chi energy of movement in each of the 5 elements. You've seen early reflections of this in the descriptions of the 5 elements supplied by Confucius. Here I'll add a little bit more descriptive commentary. Fire, of course, ascends, caused by its ascending chi. Wood grows upward as its chi is upward. Water flows down, caused by its downward chi. Metal is dense, has sharp boundaries, and lets go of impurities when purified, all caused by its chi, whose nature is to condense. And the earth compacts and breaks down complex substances caused by its particular chi. Don't forget that there's a yin and yang variant for each type of chi. Some time ago, probably in the Han era from 256 BCE to 220 CE, the elements of change were fitted to the trigrams and the bagua we discussed in Chapter 3. This fit is shown here in blue type. Note that the 5 elements had to be expanded to 8 to fit the 8 characters bagua. There are now 2 woods and 2 metals, whose yin and yang and chi components vary. This arrangement became very significant for divination and other Taoist arts and sciences. Over long stretches of time, Chinese scholars found all sorts of qualities that could be associated with each of the 8 trigrams and their elements of change, as shown here highlighted in yellow. Note that there are the 2 woods and 2 metals we've spoken of that have been designated small and big to differentiate them. Starting near the center of the diagram, each trigram has an associated chi energy. Recall from Confucius's 10 Wings, Chapter 3, that the chi energy of fire, Li, for example, is clinging, and the chi energy of earth, Kun, is receptive, as shown in the diagram for each trigram. The next rung out gives the traditional nature image name for the bagua, fire, earth, lake, etc. Moving successively outward, this is followed by the colors, human organs, seasons, family relations, human attributes, the attributes of change, and the compass directions for each bagua trigram. Associating the 5 elements of change with the bagua means that as change occurs in a predicted order, it brings with it all the characteristics associated with its linked trigram. By the time of the Han Dynasty, beginning around 200 BCE, the elements of change theory was fully developed, and the cycles it represented were understood as governing everything from heaven to earth. The description here follows the outermost arrows in the diagram, starting with wood, then moving clockwise. Recall from Chapter 2 that wood is the first and second heavenly stem year of the Chinese 60-year cycle, so that's why we start with it. Change begins as an erupting, sprouting force, as when seedlings emerge in the spring, hence the designation wood that recalls the wood that arises from a sprouting tree seedling in spring. This sprouting is considered, appropriately enough, new yang, as it's a progressive, expansive, upward force. Change continues, as for example when the plants reach toward the sun in the early summer, hence the designation fire. Fire is, of course, full yang. It is also the 3rd and 4th element in the Chinese 60-year cycle. The next change is a metamorphosis, a transformation to a resting state. Eventually, plants are harvested or die and are returned to earth. Hence, the next phase is designated earth. Yin and yang are balanced in this phase and every 3 months when seasons change. This is the 5th and 6th element in the Chinese 60-year cycle. The next change is metal. Recall from above, follow the arrow, that earth is generated from the fire of burning wood. This earth, or ash, contains metals like sodium, potassium, and calcium. Thus, metal is the next stage of change and is considered new yin and associated with autumn and the 7th and 8th element in the yearly cycle. Metals like sodium and potassium dissolve in water, so water is the next phase of change. Water is deep, receptive, and still. It's considered full yin and associated with winter and the 9th and 10th element in the yearly cycle. Water, of course, nourishes plants to begin sprouting, so the cycle begins anew. In addition to the creative or generative cycles, the Wuxing also describes a destructive, restraining, controlling, or overcoming cycle, as represented by the inner turquoise arrows that I'll show you. The direction of change, however, is different than in the clockwise generative cycles. Wood controls earth because it holds the earth together and can also break it apart. Earth controls water because earth absorbs water. Water controls fire because water extinguishes fire. And fire controls metal because it can melt metal into liquid. And metal controls wood because metal can cut down trees into wood. As you've seen, Daoism has a set of spiritual practices that are quite unique. They build upon the ancient concepts of yin and yang, the mystical patterns revealed in nature as the He Tu and Lo Shao, the 8 trigrams, the flow of qi, and the 5 elements which we just discussed. Many people inside and outside of China, Chinese or not, base their health, the way they structure their environment, and the decisions they make on these interesting concepts and their spiritual power. As you've seen, these systems can get quite complicated, so I need to be quite restrained in what more I review here. Recall way back in Chapter 3, we reviewed divination practices using the I Ching, so no need to review that here. We also touched on how the 9-box Lo Shu Square, known as the 9 palaces, served as the organizing principle for heaven and hell, as well as Chinese provinces, cities, villages, imperial halls, temples, and ultimately life. I should, however, say a bit about Chinese medicine, feng shui, and Chinese divination based on Bazi, as these are all major Taoist spiritual practices. You've seen that conserving spiritual energy, qi, was a component of the schools established by Zhang Daoling, and that creating internal harmony of spirits and keeping the one was a major occupation in the School of Highest Clarity, Shangqing. This occupation with qi and spirit regulation continued to develop in Chinese medicine, and the theory of the 5 elements greatly extended this line of thinking. The figure at right shows how the body organs and systems fit into the 5-element framework. Some of the logic is straightforward, but a word of caution is in order. The anatomical terms used are not always limited in Chinese medicine to what the West knows as the function of these structures. Okay, here we go linking the body parts, with the elements of change. The heart and fire seem to go together, as both are active and generate heat. The nervous system also seems to operate, bringing fire-like sensations, and the small intestine produces fire-like heat in digestion, so the association with fire is natural. The heart is considered yin, and the small intestines yang. The stomach and earth are both associated with producing nourishment, so they go together. The stomach is yang, and the spleen, which is said to extract qi from food, is yin. The lungs, colon, and skin create boundaries with different environmental substances. Metal, with its dense structure, is also good at creating boundaries. Lungs, colon, and skin also eliminate impurities like metal does when heated. The lungs are said to be yin, and the colon is yang. The kidneys and bladder produce and hold water, so the association with water is easy to make. The kidney is yin and the bladder is yang. The liver stores and releases blood as needed in the same way that wood moves water, its blood, from roots to stems. As wood grows in a determined progressive fashion, a healthy liver is said to help a person think in a determined and progressive fashion. The gallbladder is said to help turn plans into action. The liver is said to be yin and the gallbladder yang. I won't defend how elements of change are said to affect the body's operation. This system predates modern knowledge by many hundreds of years, but I will provide a simple traditional explanation. The liver supplies blood to the heart, which supplies blood to the stomach. The water and nutrients from the stomach feed and lubricate the lungs. The lungs support kidney function through respiration, which facilitates kidney function. The lungs also send qi energy from the breath downward to the kidneys to use. The kidneys and bladder produce water, which supports the wood of liver and gallbladder. The qi energy the kidneys receive from the lungs is also transformed into blood in the liver. Those are just the generative factors. There are also controlling factors, the inner arrows in the diagram here. Given this understanding, a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner seeks to establish balance among the component parts of the body. Parts that are weak can be strengthened. Parts that are in excess can be weakened. For example, if someone presents with breathing problems, a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner would not only consider the lungs, but the spleen and stomach, which may be generating phlegm, the kidneys, which may be draining qi from the lungs, the liver, whose qi may be stagnating, causing excess qi in the lungs, or external factors. Chinese traditional medicine is complex, and I won't elaborate further, and will turn instead to consider the more ethereal topic of prognostication. In Chapter 3, I introduced the Hetu and the Loshu squares. Both were said to have had mystical prognostic capacities. While ancient interpretation techniques are lost, modern adaptations in China use the Loshu grid, and in Japan the 9-star key chart to make prognostications. I'll skip over these more modern methods and turn to the older Bazi birth chart, as it showcases how the elements of change are used to guide one's life. The Bazi birth chart originated in the Song dynasty, which ran from 960 to 1279 of the Common Era. Recall from Chapter 2 that in the ancient Chinese calendar, each hour, day, month, and year is designated by two symbols called a heavenly stem and an earthly branch. So to designate one's hour, day, month, and year of birth takes 8 characters. As you may recall, Ba means 8 in Chinese. Characters or words are called Zi, so the 8 characters in the chart are called Ba Zi. The Bagua we spoke of in Chapter 3 refers to the 8 trigrams we reviewed, not the 8 characters we see here. The 8 Chinese characters, Bazi, in the example I've shown here from SS in motion, are shown in the red outlined box. Using the hour, day, month, and year makes this a better reading of one's personality and life course than just using the Chinese zodiac sign alone, as often found in Chinese restaurants, which only uses the year. As you can see here, online programs exist that can easily generate your Bazi birth chart. BaziCalculator.com supplies a lot of interpretive data. ChatGPT and Gemini will also calculate and interpret a birth chart. Both AI programs have, however, miscalculated my chart, which they eventually acknowledged. The key thing is to make sure that the chart contains a correct translation of your birth date to its Chinese calendar equivalent. The place of birth will also affect this as time zones change things. The Hong Kong Observatory has online conversion tables that are generally the standard. Interpreting the chart involves a world of complexity. To understand my chart took months of study and yielded different results depending on what method I used. I'll spare you the tortured details and focus only on illustrating an example of how elements of change work in the chart. First, note that the 8 outlined boxes containing the 8 characters, Bazi, in the chart at right, also contains the elements of change that we've been talking about: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. Now we need a starting point on the chart, and that is typically what is called the day master, which is always the heavenly stem for one's day of birth in the Chinese calendar. I've circled it here. The day master is said to reveal one's basic personality traits, strengths, and weaknesses. In the chart here, the day master is Earth, represented by a mountain. Considering this alone, the chart would say that this person would be stable, reliable, and grounded, much like a mountain. Bazi chart interpretation, however, considers all elements in the chart, not just the day master. We won't go into all this, but we'll show one example of how elements of change affect the day master. Note that there's a lot of the element of change, water, in this chart that you can see in the yellow outlined box. Recall that from the diagram at left, the earth is drained, controlled by water, as shown by the red circle. Thus, the earth in this chart is weakened by all the water. Also note that the chart contains metal next to the day star, as shown in the blue triangle. As you can see at left, metal generates water, as you can see by the yellow circle. This increase in water further drains Earth, recall the red circled arrow. So just considering these effects of elements of change, the day master is not strong, and it is water and metal that dominate this person. ChatGPT, in an appropriate summary, suggests that this person should increase fire, as fire strengthens the day master Earth. This, it says, can be done by soaking in more sunlight and wearing red colors. It suggests creative activities, spiritual study, or meditation, and it also suggests increasing Earth by gardening or pottery, walking barefoot, following stable routines, and making long-term commitments. On the flip side, ChatGPT suggests reducing water by avoiding excessive emotion, avoid overwork at night, and limiting cold environments. They also suggest reducing metal by being less of a perfectionist, avoiding self-criticism, and avoiding getting trapped in rigid structures. As I mentioned earlier, what we have reviewed is the start of Bazi interpretation. There are also hidden heavenly stems, seasonal effects, seasonal combinations, 10 gods, and other factors to consider, enough to keep Bazi interpreters well employed. You can also see how the Bazi birth chart can control behavior and how Bazi interpreters were often Taoist priests. Above the obvious objection that one's birth date in the Chinese calendar should have little to do with how one should lead one's life, the other great problem with Bazi is that given the number of interacting variables and a complicated weighting scheme, a good storyteller can tell almost any story with the chart. Now let's talk briefly about feng shui. The flow of qi is important in establishing health both internally in Chinese medicine and externally in feng shui. While feng shui can be complex, the basic principle is that the energy from outside, qi, should enter a room gently and not rush in, and that qi should circulate freely and accumulate within a home, not stagnate or dissipate. The main door should not face the back door or a big window. Furniture should be placed with a solid backing behind it, and if sitting behind a desk, you should face the door. As a religion, Daoism presents both familiar themes and interesting differences with other religions. As to the familiar, we've seen that the generative power of the One in Daoism is paralleled by God, Ahura Mazda, and Brahman in other religions. The attempt to bring heaven to earth seen in other religions is paralleled in Daoism by Huang Lao's attempted integration of Lao Tzu's spirituality with Confucian government, and by Zhang Lu's establishment of a theocracy. The focus on social justice that we see in other religions found expression in Daoism in the scripturally inspired rebellion against injustice, in the Yellow Turban Rebellion, and in Zhang Daoling's prediction of the coming judgment against the social corruption he saw as so prevalent. As in other religions, we've also seen apocalyptic expectations in Daoism and a belief that only the elect will be saved. And we've seen the battles between angels and demons that are so common in other religions are mirrored in Daoism's many gods and demons. There's also some partial similarities with other religions. Initially in Daoism, as in Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, there was a focus on a single divine figure, Lao Tzu. After Lao Tzu, however, various Taoists also received revelations which contributed significantly to Taoism. Zhang Daoling received revelations from Lao Tzu, Wei Hua Kun from Wang Bo, Yang Ji from Wei Hua Kun. In Christianity, we see a similar thing with John receiving a revelation from a risen Jesus, in Revelation 1:1, for example. There's also similarity between Qi and the Holy Spirit. Both are invisible, ever-present, animating forces. Recall that Qi means breath and atmospheric vapor, and that in the Bible, God breathes Spirit into Adam, and in the New Testament, the Holy Spirit descends as wind at Pentecost. In Taoism, however, Qi became personified as the three pure ones, perhaps to make it easier for common people to grasp the concept. Of course, the Holy Spirit is also personified in Jesus in Christianity. As we've noted, Taoism is similar to Hinduism and Buddhism in that it contains many gods. This appears as a huge difference with early Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but some of this difference is simply how gods are defined. In each of these religions, East and West, there is only one God, whether internally conceived as part of nature or externally conceived as outside of nature. The gods are just personifications of spiritual qualities, nature, or spiritual heroes and villains, historical or mythical. Taoism is a bit different in the way it developed belief in heaven and the afterlife. In ancient China, ancestors, at least imperial ones, were alive in heaven, but heaven simply mirrored the physical world and was not a place of judgment. In Lao-tzu and Zhuangzi, there's also no description of judgment and no revelation of a structured heaven. It wasn't until the celestial masters, Tianxi Dao, that the concept of a morally ordered, structured heaven appeared, which was added upon in later times by adopting more Buddhist ideas. By contrast, in Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, judgment and the afterlife were an essential part of early teachings. In Judaism, there is no reference to the afterlife in the Torah, but scholars believe that this was likely the result of needing to distance early Jewish belief from that of their Egyptian captors, who were too focused on the afterlife. Belief in the afterlife appear after the Torah and the prophets and the writings. Taoism does appear more focused on health, longevity, and immortality than other religions. There's some similarities with Ayurvedic medicine and Hinduism, but the focus is more central in Taoism, and it uses different tools like priestly intercession, talismans, and rituals. The pursuit of health is not, however, the sole focus in Taoism. There's a moral code and social obligations, just as in other religions. Lastly, the Taoist occupation with divination, feng shui, and martial arts find no easy parallel in degree in other religions, and so seem to be unique differences. All in all, Chinese native religion, Taoism, seems to have developed along similar lines as the other great religions. To be sure, Taoism has put its own unique stamp on what has been humanity's common pursuit to understand God and nature and build a society in harmony with this reality. But its attempt to bring heaven to earth is the same as the other great religions, as is its expectation that periodically the spiritual world must extend its regenerative powers to earth to restore and progressively refashion it. Having explored how Taoism developed and took shape, we are now able to turn our gaze westward and look at what was happening in Rome around the year 200 of the Common Era.